Good morning, everyone. Okay, thanks so much for coming to this session for our Open Education Bootcamp Day 2. Very pleased to have a panel of presenters who are going to be talking about how they managed their OER projects and offer the audience some best practices and lessons. So we're going to allow each of them to speak for 15 minutes, and then there'll be questions and answers at the end. Does that sound good? We have a Q&A that will be available for people, and you can also use the chat. I will also enable your microphone so you're able to speak, but as the webinar format doesn't allow video, there won't be any video. Welcome to our guest panel. We have Dr. Mel Hart, who is Associate Dean of Student Experience and Engagement here at the University of Regina. Dr. Robert Petry, Assistant Professor of Applied Mathematics for Campion College at University of Regina. Dr. Jérôme Melançon, Associate Professor of French and Francophone Intercultural Studies. Dr. Amber Fletcher, Professor and Academic Director of the Community Engagement and Research Center here at the University of Regina. And Ting Zhou, who's an instructional designer at the First Nations University. All of our panel are experts. Did I get everyone? Dr. Arzu Sardarli, he's the professor of physics and mathematics. So welcome to our panelists. I'm just going to let you take it away, and we'll have some time for conversation after.
Okay, so I guess that's me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just sharing my screen. Bear with me one moment. Okay. As always, the Zoom bar is right in the middle of my view, so there we go. All right, so hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Really looking forward to this panel because open access is very important to me. I'm very much an advocate of this approach and have gone open access in all of my classes as well. So today I'm going to tell you though about my experience writing an open access textbook. And I'm going to focus mostly on some lessons that I've learned because it has been quite a learning experience. So my project is to write an open access textbook from scratch. So at the time of my proposal, there was no open access qualitative methods textbook on the market, so to speak, the open access resources market. The commercial market is very saturated with qualitative methods textbooks, but I couldn't find any open access ones. There has since been one open access qualitative methods textbook that has been released, but I found that it still doesn't have the same objective as mine, and that is to connect the philosophical paradigms that guide qualitative research to the methodological frameworks, to the methods. So this is something I found as someone who teaches qualitative research methods at the third year level, at the graduate level, also at the second year level a little bit. I found that there was really an absence in both, obviously the open access market, but also the commercial market for textbooks, qualitative research methods textbooks that present the methods as connected to bigger philosophical assumptions, you know, post-positivism, interpretivism, critical approaches. And I felt that there was a gap there. So, sorry, just moving trying to move the Zoom bar over is in my way. There we go. So the textbook that I've designed has 13 chapters, and it's meant to follow the 13 weeks of a typical semester, so one chapter per semester. It also follows the trajectory of a typical qualitative research project. So we begin with the philosophical assumptions, the research question, the design, the data collection, the analysis, the mobilization, and it follows all the way through. So it's meant to really guide students, whether they're undergraduate students, or it's also targeted for graduate students as well who are new to qualitative research, to be able to really design that project from beginning to end. So each of the 13 chapters has a set of learning objectives at the beginning. There's also practice activities at the end of each chapter. Sometimes these are as simple as some multiple choice questions. Sometimes they're a bit more complex and involve, for example, finding an article that exemplifies a specific qualitative approach and describing why it just why it exemplifies that approach. So there's also although all of the 13 chapters, except for one, are written by me, I do have a guest chapter that's been written on Indigenous research methods, which I had connected with a group of wonderful Indigenous scholars here at the University of Regina and asked them if they would be willing to guest author a chapter, because as a white settler woman, a non-Indigenous person, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to speak authoritatively about Indigenous research methodologies, and is not an area of expertise for me, but is very important for the book. So we have that wonderful guest chapter as well. So in terms of the copyright considerations, I decided to go with one of the admittedly more restrictive copyright, Creative Commons copyright rules. I went with an attribution, non-commercial, share alike. And what that means is that the materials in the textbook can be shared only with attribution, with citation to me. They can be remixed and reused, but they have to be, those remixes, those new products, have to be shared with a similar Creative Commons license. So it has to be shared alike. The thing that might be a little different for my project than for some other projects funded by this program is that I did decide to go with a non-commercial license on my textbook. And that is because I learned from past experience, not from this project specifically, but I have had the experience of having my published work taken and commercialized without my permission and without my consent. And so I opted to protect the material in this way. It also happened with an organization that I worked with where some work we did was commercialized and people are making money with it. So I opted to go with the non-commercial. And I'm grateful for the support I received in doing this from the open access management team at the U of R. So in terms of my work plan, my approach as originally proposed was to write one chapter per month and to build the chapters from my existing lecture materials, which I have from both my undergraduate and my graduate qualitative classes. As I learned, pandemics are not productive. I think most of us realize this. And the pandemic hit shortly after I received funding and started my project. Of course, the pandemic turns teaching into a whole new world. And a lot of us, most of us were thrown into this entirely different aspect of teaching. Teaching took over my life, as I'm sure it did for many of you. And I didn't make a lot of progress through the pandemic. So I am still working on this project several years after I had hoped to be finished. I should be finished this year. That's the goal. But my advice overall is that if you tend to have a wee touch of time optimism like I do, you think you can get more done in the time allowed that you can, take your timeline and triple it. That's my suggestion. Give yourself a bit more time, build it in. I also learned that although I had grand plans to use my lecture materials as the basis for the chapters, I found that my class materials, although I put a lot of work and thought into them, they were really only a start. There was so much more elaboration, additional reading, citations, just so much that I had to add and to learn that wasn't encapsulated in the very brief lecture materials that I had prepared. So the class materials were helpful, they were a foundation, but I would advise you if your plan is to use your lecture materials, your class materials as the foundation and just convert, it is much more complicated than that. So just know that there's a lot more reading and building that has to be done. In terms of time management, so as I've indicated, my main challenge is balancing writing time with teaching time. I teach a lot of classes, I teach large classes, I teach community engaged experiential learning in my classes. So teaching is very intense, as it is for a lot of you. And I think the reason that probably a lot of us are here talking about open access is because we care about our students. And so my tendency is to put so much time into the teaching that I don't leave a lot of time for the writing. And some of the lessons that I've learned, the strategies I've developed is one that I call teach the topic, write the topic. So as I'm teaching about, say, grounded theory, I'm trying to write the chapter at the same time because I'm reading for class anyway. I'm preparing for class, brushing up. So it's a good time to be working on the chapter as I'm preparing the lecture. I find that it makes me a more informed teacher. My memory is fresh because I've been writing about it, but it also means I can double the effort that I'm putting in to write at the same time as I'm teaching it. I have also used some other sort of time management strategies, time blocking, reserved periods of time for writing, which I try to protect as best I can. I use Cave Day, which is a group writing sort of, it's not just for writing, it can be for anything, but it's a subscription-based group approach where you basically sign up for sessions, join the session with a group of other people on Zoom, and commit to monotasking, a singular task for that period of time. And I found that to be helpful for just getting writing into my calendar, just getting it booked in. At the end of the day, too, I think it's helpful to remember who we're doing this for. So although the tendency is, well, I could answer these student emails immediately and get back to the students, or I could take my reserved time for writing and write. And at the end of the day, I'm writing this book for the students. I'm doing it because I don't want my students to struggle to afford groceries. And this is something that I can do. So remembering who it's for in the end is helpful as well. Finally, one of the last points I'd like to discuss is including research assistants. So I did budget funding for research assistants for my project. The main idea was to have the research assistants finding examples of qualitative approaches. So the idea is, if I'm writing about phenomenology, can you find me an interesting example of a study that uses phenomenology? So I can include that as a case study, a concrete example in the chapter. I also have students involved in developing practice activities and testing them. What I found here is I made a mistake. I had my students waiting on me to complete a section before they found the examples. So I would say, just hold on, I'm writing the case study section. You can go find an example of a case study after I finish writing this section. But it meant that because of, well, all of the aforementioned barriers to writing, that my students were sometimes waiting on me to get the job done. So my suggestion is if you can design, delineate, clarify the research assistant tasks early, give them a list of things to be doing and when, and have the research assistant tasks drive your progress, not have your progress drive the research assistants. That would be my suggestion, because my research assistants, unfortunately, were waiting on me a lot, and it could have been much more efficient than it was. So just for my final slide, in terms of incorporating students' feedback into the project, my approach was to use draft chapters as readings in my class. Sometimes they were required, sometimes optional. And I found that offering bonus marks for students to give feedback was really helpful because, for one thing, it gives them an impetus to do the readings, which is good. And also it gives them an impetus to, or a kind of motivation to give you meaningful feedback. I think it's challenging for students to give us feedback on our work because it involves critiquing your professor's work. So I try to emphasize that, it's don't just tell me what I want to hear. That's not feedback. You will get bonus points for telling me what you did like, but also what you didn't like about the chapter. Was it too long? Was it unclear? Do you need an example of this, or do you want more depth on that? And I found that giving the bonus marks was a good way of getting students interested in participating in the process. One thing that I've sort of tried in a peripheral way is many of the participation activities for my book have come from my class. So I've developed them into something different for the purpose of the textbook. And so I found that having students use the practice activities to do the practice activities in class is a good way of testing them. You can trial run it, you can see if it's going to be helpful, get their feedback, hopefully, and then integrate that into the practice activities at the end of every chapter. So that was another strategy I used. And that is it for me. So those are my lessons learned from a project that was meant to take a lot less time than it actually has. I'm so sorry, Shauna. Shauna has been very patient with me. Remember, triple that timeline because it always takes longer than you think. Thank you so much. I'm happy to discuss, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber.
All right, I'm just going to try and get my screen up now. All right, and I'm going to have to turn so I can see it as well. So for my project, it was a bit different. I did a series of dissection videos for the vertebrate biology course in which I'm involved. So some background for this first. It is a dissection-based lab, Biology 385. Dissections are a very unique experience for students. So during the pandemic, when we were forced to go online, it provided some challenges to overcome. It was a different experience to do dissections virtually, to really try to immerse the students into that experience. I know there are lots of platforms out there where dissections are done virtually now, but I still am a proponent of having that hands-on experience. Now, when we came back to in-person learning, I saw that a lot of students had a new approach to their classroom experience, and there was a lot of fear in students. And I decided to keep the videos up that I had created and found that they really became an important learning tool for students. A lot of students who had anxiety about attending the labs, what they would be doing, they could go through those videos and see what was going to happen step by step. I mean, I provide lab handouts as well, but for a lot of students, they really wanted to see exactly what they might be experiencing. And then they also use them for review materials. So they were able to go back and check the videos ahead of the midterm and final and see whatever aspect they might want to look at. So going with that, I could see the benefit of having new videos. And the idea behind this project then was to have the students create the content. I've got pictures here. These are the animals that we dissect in the lab. And I really wanted to tap into the student feedback that I was getting to create new videos. Because honestly, during the pandemic, I did the best I could, but the videos really needed some updating. I was fortunate enough to have a team of students. I had 4 students sign up to do an independent research class with me. And I had what I'm calling old eyes and new eyes in there. The old eyes were students who had taken the Biology 385 course previously. And the new eyes, those were students who had never seen the dissections before. So I had fresh eyes, fresh takes on things from those students who had never experienced the dissections, and the experience of those students who had. So they worked together, and this component was part of another project they did for the independent research. So the goal was to create high definition videos, much better to those that I had thrown together during the pandemic. And a side bonus of this was to reduce animal use. Every year in teaching a teaching assistant how to go through the lab, I have to go through a dissection with them. And I do use that specimen then in the lab as a demo for students to access and use. But the videos are good enough, I think they're very clear, that the TA can use them as well. And it may seem small to reduce only by a couple animals for each species, but I'd like to think it contributes to an overall reduction. So I'm going to jump straight into, I don't want to show videos because some people get really upset at seeing dissections. So if you want to see them, they're on the Science YouTube channel. I'll jump into the questions that we were given, and I have very brief answers, but I hope they're helpful anyway. So how do you effectively plan and manage your OER project from conception to implementation? Well, I was fortunate enough to be really limited by the student schedules. And I say limited, but it really helped me stay on task. Because the students were doing this as an independent research project, I had to have everything done in the term that they were enrolled in that course. So that really kept me to a tight timeline. Some key milestones and timelines to consider. The biggest one for me was the expense submission deadlines. And this might seem odd, but it ties into 1C, which were what were some of the challenges along the way and how did you overcome them? Even though I ordered animals early in the summer for this project to happen, the supply chain issue came up and reared its ugly head. And so even though this project, I've done it, I am still waiting on specimens to come in. So there's still an expense reimbursement process happening. I was fortunate enough that I had some specimens on hand that the students could use. However, they weren't the most ideal specimens. Those that I ordered for the project had more injections of latex to show the blood vessels. So we worked with what we had. So next question, how did you prioritize tasks and manage competing demands? Again, it was really based on the students and the animal availability. The students, as I said, had this as a component of their research course with me, and we worked on whatever animals we had available first. Luckily, we had some of the more basic animals, the easier to dissect animals to start with, and we could progress to the more challenging specimens. I also found that it was really important to communicate with students. So we'd email back and forth, they would text me. We also chatted extensively in class about how they were feeling about their timelines with the project, if they needed to shift anything to make sure that they could get everything done. And I found that worked really well for this process. For ensuring the consistency, quality, and version control throughout the content development process, it was again working with the students very closely. So they had a description of the dissection available to them before they did the dissection. We discussed any issues that they thought they might have. And because I had 2 students who had taken the class previously, they gave their input as to what the students who were doing the dissections might want to change. And this helped inform my, my lab handouts as well. So I revised those along the way. So really creating an environment of communication was essential to making sure one student's dissection was similar to another student's dissection. And just as a side note, we have sexes of each species. So one student could work on a female, the other could work on a male. So we did have enough specimens that the 2 students who were doing the dissections would get their experience with each of the animals. In terms of what technology tools and platforms did or do you use to support the creation, hosting, and dissemination of OERs? This was an interesting one for me. I had never done 4K video filming before. I found out that it's good to use iMovie for this, and they were shared on YouTube. So this did create some challenges for me because I had to learn how to use iMovie. I'm not a highly technical person. I had to use a friend's Mac to do this. I found out that the iPad version is different from the full version of iMovie. I did rely on CCE's audio editing services to really clean up the audio just to take out background noise. The students were exceptional. They're very good with technology, so they shared a lot of hints along the way. And then I relied heavily on supports from Science's communications specialist. So then in terms of collecting feedback from users and how I would then incorporate these, it is a little bit challenging when you're dealing with animals. So I do collect information from students. They're my key resource for this. In science, they all complete student satisfaction surveys. And I find the students are really quite honest about things, and I do take that feedback quite seriously and try to incorporate it into future iterations of my materials. However, I'd like to collect information on YouTube, but because we're using animals, there are a lot of people who don't believe in the use of animals in teaching, and I didn't want the YouTube video comment section to be filled with a lot of very negative comments that were focusing on what I would consider to be not the best part of why I'm sharing these videos. So I do collect feedback, I rely on the students, and I hope to address these in future videos. Now, I've put 6A and 6B together because they're both the same answer for this. So what processes do you have in place for managing, tracking, licensing, and copyright considerations? And how do you ensure compliance? I am very fortunate that I have a person who looks after that. So because it's hosted on the Faculty of Sciences YouTube page, that's not under my name. It's under the oversight of our communications specialist. So I let her handle all of that for me. And then getting close to the end here, what strategies do you use to promote awareness and adoption of your OER, and how do you engage with external partners and leverage networks to extend the reach of it? This is also one answer for me. I let colleagues here know of the resources and their availability to use. I share it with colleagues at other institutions that the resource is available. The networks I'm currently in are not those where animal dissection usually comes up. So I rely more on my colleagues from other institutions and word of mouth from students as well. They get very enthusiastic about the videos and share it with others. And then I see, based on your experiences, what are some key lessons learned and best practices that I recommend to others? Well, work with students. I'm in my job because I love working with students, and projects like this and the independent research projects that I do really bring that home to me. The students have so much to share. They have great input about what they want to see in their learning materials and how to improve things. Your project will benefit from having student involvement. I can't speak more strongly about that. And so my advice to someone starting a new ER initiative would be work with students and be flexible. Like I said, I'm still waiting on a couple of my specimens to come in. I had to come up with workarounds on the fly because of that limited time frame of working with the students. It all worked out. The videos are useful learning tools, and they've received a number of hits on YouTube. I think I'm quite proud of how everything worked out, and I have this information to help me improve those videos for the next iteration. And I see there's a whole bunch of stuff in the chat. So I'll move to my thank you slide and see if I can answer any of these. There are my links. Thank you for sharing them. My OE work plan was very helpful, yes, because I did have an overall idea. I just had to shift things on the fly. So even though I had wanted to work in a sequential way to dissect certain animals at a certain time, it all worked out. We got the animals dissected, and I had all those dissection descriptions ready to go. So the students were prepared ahead of time. So whatever animal we were able to work on, they could do it. So I will close those and stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mel. Jérôme, you're up next.
Thanks, Shauna. Very happy to be here. I'm going to talk about one of the projects I've done. I've had a few projects around OERs, none of which have been actually funded through the program, but the tools are there anyway. And so I'm going to show you something different. And I also didn't prepare a PowerPoint because I didn't. But I will show you some pictures, and I'll show you what it looks like at the point it's at right now. That's a lot of what we've been doing, and it's my kids, is actually tied to a larger project called Settler Colonialism in Canada. It's a project that I've co-led, but Emily Grafton from political studies here and David McDonald are actually doing a bit more than I am. One of the things that I was on board for was to help find different ways of reaching different publics. And so this was one of the things we had done. Many of you, some of you, a few of you might have been present at 4 talks that we had organized around what we call the living land acknowledgement. So we had 4 guests who talked about the land here. And we wanted to make that available, and we wanted that to live online, at least for a while. And so this seemed to me like a great way of doing it, partly because I like putting things together. It's kind of fun for me. And partly because it's dynamic, so we can be really responsive. I've actually made a few changes lately because it's growing a little bit. But one of the changes that we've had to do, for instance, in terms of being responsive, is that in Greek culture, when somebody passes away, we're not supposed to use their name or show pictures for a year. So we've actually had to remove a chapter from the resource until that year passes. That'd be hard to do under other models. Here, I just have to toggle a little button and it just disappears. Only I can see it. So it's good for those kinds of ability to be responsive to different events. This is a different kind of educational resource. It's not for a course. It's not for students specifically. It responds to a need for continuing education on everything that's tied to reconciliation and colonialism. In putting together this conference, essentially, we wanted to do more than just acknowledge the land. It felt odd to just have a land acknowledgement and move on when we were going to talk about settler colonialism in the first place. And it also felt like a bit of an easy way out to just do the ritual and then move on to the talks. So basically here we wanted to have a series of talks for people who came to Regina or who would watch the conference online to have a sense beforehand about the territory here. And as this lives online now, we at least want to both critique the performative aspect of the national acknowledgements and suggest something else, and also give something that people can use, but also have people know what they're saying when they're acknowledging the territory, and do more than that. That's quick ritual that we often do. So what does it mean to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 4 with the presence on Treaty 6? What does it mean that we are on the lands of the Nehiyawak, the Anishinabek, the Dakota and the Lakota peoples, the homeland of the Métis? There's different ways, permutations of words to say all this in more or less convincing and convinced ways. We want to interrogate that and give people the tools to do that. So if you look at this here, you can have a general idea, and essentially what we have is, and I can see this, but you can't, a series of recordings, and then right now I'm working through the transcriptions that have been done to change them into transcripts, and have them be available as well. And the fun thing with this is that I'll show you here on the dashboard. So this is what it looks like when you're behind the scenes. You can organize the book. And essentially, because of what I'm showing in exports or not, this can be exported into a PDF book, and the videos won't show up. It'll be just the transcriptions, along with pictures of the authors. And so it works as a PDF, as a book, and also works as an online version where people can just decide to watch the videos as opposed to reading. That's one of the funnest parts of all this, is being able to play with these versions. They're both good versions, the recording and the transcription, but they do different things, and they're for different peoples and different styles of learning. I found that working with Pressbooks was relatively easy. There's a few things that you have to get familiar with in terms of how often you have to save, what happens when you do save, a lot of the layout kind of elements. But essentially, because it's really that what you see is what you get kind of approach to writing online, you don't have to know anything. Now, I used to like code, write HTML as a teenager, so I used to do web pages. So I'll go in the back and fix a few things that it looks the way I want it to. But really, you don't need any knowledge whatsoever. And in fact, I'm doing everything in Word and then pasting it here and making it pretty in here. And that's often enough for it to work. I'll use the conclusion that we have here just as an example. So if you look at the recording, for instance, you'll have the title here. You'll have the authors that show up. That's all automatic, right? Because I put it in the metadata, then it just shows up by itself. And then you've got the link here to the videos that we have on MediaSpace. As you can see at the bottom here. So we have control over this, and we can see it, those kind of things. And then it's relatively easy after that to move on to the transcript. You can actually just go through the contents as well. Right? It's all on the side here. Basically, we just transcribed it. We fixed up the language so it looks nice. And then we added in some subtitles, some headings, right? So that they show up in the overall table of contents if I define it that way. So it's relatively easy to put together. So just what it looks like at this moment. I still need a bit of work to finish the transcriptions, but it does give us so much room, and we could even have a chapter about the cover. So I actually have a chapter where I sat down with David Garneau, who is the artist who provided the artwork here, and we talked about it. Right, and then we edited the conversation afterwards so that we can even talk about the artwork that we use, because we're not limited on space and number of pages. So I'm going to talk to you now, and you get to look at my face while I do this. Just going through these the questions that were shared with us. Generally, because I've been doing a fair bit of editing work over the last few years, this is a lot like editing a journal issue or a book. It's the same kind of work, really. So we have different, in this case, and then a different OER as well. We have different contributors, and so we need to deal with them, different timelines with everybody else. So that's not really different. I didn't find. The one advantage is that by going back and forth with people, if somebody's really lagging behind, that's fine. We don't have to kick them out of the project. We can just say, well, we'll add you in later, and then have a version 1.1 or whatever, and then have that in the notes at the start. And when we're working as a different project on with graduate students who have very, very specific limits on their time, that actually allows them to stay on board and continue in the way that they couldn't have otherwise. So I found that just really wonderful. One thing that was really important to consider was to make the project clear and understandable to contributors, because you're here to understand how this all works. Maybe people don't even know that this exists. So you really have to explain what you mean by an online educational resource, open educational resource, how the copyright is going to work, right? And actually talk with people, sit down with them to explain not just what you're asking of them as you usually would, but how it's going to work out in the long run. So we actually signed contracts at the moment of filming for the videos. And that includes the release, that includes the contract includes the kind of license that we're using. It's the same license that Amber mentioned too. You have to acknowledge where it's from if you use it. We actually said that they can't remix it for this one, just because it's so specific to what the authors are saying that we didn't feel that was really fair. It also cannot be commercialized. That's the whole point. We did have an honorarium for those who took part. We also wanted to look at the possibilities that the OER format opens. One of them is the glossary. And so we were looking at having contributors contribute definitions for the glossary, which allows them to take all these long definitions you always have to put in your papers. You take it out of the paper, they really help for the word count. But then you have this glossary that's for the whole of the book instead of a specific chapter. And you also get to have different entries and different meanings for the same words, which really reflects the kind of pluralism that we wanted to show too. And that's normal to have different definitions across different authors. I think when it comes to different editions, I think that you would have to have actually rework the whole resource for me to actually have a second edition. And so adding a chapter is a different version, and that's where using the software analogy, right? You have the version, we had the beta version early on because people only had access to the videos and nothing else. It didn't look nice, just you can watch them, it's here, it's easy. And then we had the actual version 1.0, which we're still working on right now, and we're hoping to launch before too long, along with the other resource that's parallel to it. To have a second version, we'd have to have different chapters. We'd have to have to review them, to change them, to upgrade, update our reflection on the themes as well. So for me, that's where you get to version 2.0 is, okay, we've went through the whole thing. It's not the same thing anymore. As if you look at this, you get something different than the original, as opposed to a modification of the original. You can have version 1.1, 1.2, and so on if you wanted to. That's probably what we'll end up doing if we do need to add people on as we go along. Prioritizing tasks was quite a challenge because there's everything else in the world at the same time, and I was also department head at the same time. Bad idea, turns out, to do all this. The other project to this one was a bit more time sensitive. We had to pay the students their honoraria, and so we just finished a lot of that first. And now it's putting everything online that's happening all at once, really. So as I get time over the next month, really, I'll be finishing this. Prioritizing tasks, managing these competing demands, is really about thinking about who you're working with, give room to contributors to influence the outcome, pass their own text or video. So it's really a collective work in this case. And for us to think about the public very clearly, what really needs to go in there in the end and what we can actually push out. So the glossary, it turns out we're not going to have because we just want to be able to finish this and make it available as opposed to keep tinkering with it. In looking at consistency and quality, the clear division of labor between people involved and having a team to double check a lot of different things, right? We don't have an editor in the way that we might with usually a publisher, and so it's important to have somebody else who can, read over and see what we or I might have missed. Community editing is our own work. We're not cutting it out, but something that luckily I'm able to do because of my past experience. We actually we have a grid on, it was a Google Docs, and we could use Microsoft 365 for that, but we have a grid with tasks and responsibilities for the 4 editors on the project. So that's really important too. And when it comes to technology, we worked with AV services. This was actually Stephen Martin's last project. I've always enjoyed working with him. This worked really well. It's also him who edited it, and so that was a big part of the work. The conclusion introduction we actually filmed ourselves, and I'm going to use my own skills to just splice a few things where we're just chatting about what we were doing. So I'll have these basic things in there. So that's like Mel said, it's a fair bit of work to get the video aspect out. I did it cover myself, and so I use free software for this, like Inkscape and GIMP. It's about learning that too. They're like really developed versions of Microsoft Paint, but not as bulky as Photoshop. So that's relatively easy to use. And a big problem was captioning. And we had research assistants do the transcripts, and that's why we have the chapters as transcripts instead of having captions. So that's one way we solved that problem. Last few things here. To promote awareness and adoption of this, we'll actually hold a launch for the two. This will be a larger event, so to reintroduce people to it. We actually hope that people will use this at the U of R and across Saskatchewan. The two resources come out of a network building conference and symposium, so we also have a network of people in place who can do that with us. And there's also other possibilities to go on to write for the conversation, for instance, to say, well, this is coming out, here's a larger issue, right? So it's furthering the message a little bit. I'll show you one last thing. I know that we're at time, Shana, but I liked that I put this together for myself. So it might be helpful to at least have it on the recording before I stop. So talking about milestones and timelines, we had two at the same time, right? So this is just kind of what it looked like doing this kind of work. The milestones we had to hit, we put timelines on these that kept on shifting, and going back and forth between the two projects so that we weren't wasting time, and we're filling our time well when waiting on other people to finish their parts as well. So as assembling the resource is the thing that is really important to keep in mind. So this is not the same, right? We do have to put it together so it looks nice and is nice to use in the end, so people actually go back to it. So yeah, glad to be here. I'm looking forward to people's questions later on.
All right, am I up?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Sorry, I've had a lot of tech troubles today. It's like, okay, let's try this. Tell me if you can see this. Okay. We good? Yeah. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Petry. I'm at Campion College, which is part of the University Regina Federation. And I'm very happy to speak to you today about my experiences with OER. So my history with open source goes back a long way. It started after my master's degree, and I got hired to work a bit at the Ellen Blair Cancer Center as a programmer. And at that time, open source software, in particular Linux, was just coming on stream. And they had a piece of software that was developed by a colleague in Saskatoon that was going to be openly licensed to work with storing CT scans that were being produced by their CT scanners. After that little period there, which I essentially got the opportunity to become a computer programmer, which was quite excellent. I then went to do my PhD here at the U of R, and my experience with computers allowed me to essentially work on the computer cluster here that we have in the physics department, and to do my research. So I sort of augmented my work, and I worked on some open source projects for computer clustering. Then, after my PhD, I had the opportunity to work at SciEst, which is now Sask Polytech, and I was working out at Moose Jaw doing mathematics, teaching in their geomatics and computer-assisted design programs. And one of the things that really impacted me there was that they had a real culture of sharing at SciEst, which I don't think is as common at the university level. And part of the reason is that when you're at some place like SciEst or Sask Polytech, where you're teaching more classes, it's almost impossible to survive if you don't share. And so that kind of became ingrained in me. Now, when I left there, one of the things I did was worked with one of the professors to convert some of their open work into a more typeset professional LaTeX document. And when we were leaving there, we had to decide how we were going to continue to share it, because we both kind of owned pieces of it. And this is where open licensing saved our bacon, because it allowed us to continue to both use this document independently and develop it in the way that we wanted to. So I was able to carry it with me to Campion College, where I had just been hired, and SciAst was able to continue to use the document as well and change it as they wished without my approval. So that was excellent. And I have to say, I think one of the reasons I got hired by Campion College was my commitment to the creation of open educational resources at the university. So that statistics course book I still use, and it was developed with Blake Friesen out at SciAst. Since that time, when I came to the university here, one of the first things I thought was, well, let's do the same thing again. I am a new teacher to some of these courses, and so I'm going to find the really established teachers that are prepared to share and do a deal with them. And so I worked with Fatini Labropoulou and Iqbal Hussain at Luther College, and they were happy to share their materials with me. And I said, I'm going to turn these into great electronic documents that we can all use in our courses. And so with them, I have collaborated to create 2 calculus course books and 1 linear algebra course book, which essentially, along with my statistics course book, allows me to teach into all of my main classes with open educational resources. And students can effectively get through my courses with those course books. And I'm going to talk a bit about how they were created shortly. But I would say, what is a course book and how am I distinguishing that from a textbook? For me, what a course book is a focused document that students can use to learn exactly what you are supposed to be teaching them in that course. So one problem with a conventional textbook and even open source ones, open educational resources, is they can have a lot of bloat and they can be so big that you can't even carry them to class. Whereas our course books are focused to the actual syllabus of the course, and students can carry them around, and they allow me to refer directly to the course book, so I can do more of the actual teaching in the class that doesn't depend on definitions and theorems, because they have access to those things in the course. Now, one of the things that I had to do when I created these course books was, because I was using LaTeX, which is a document language that is familiar with people in the sciences for sure, because that's what we typically will write our theses and stuff in, and our articles in. I had to create some tools to augment the tools that are already built into LaTeX to manage some of the things that are unique to a textbook, like example blocks and problem blocks that would auto-generate appendices and stuff like that. Now, my coding experience and the fact that LaTeX is an extensible language, essentially for creating, essentially a computer language for creating documents, allowed me to do that. Other projects I worked on something called the Callisto project, which was creating open educational resource notebooks for high school students and elementary students in mathematics, using this something called the Jupyter platform. So that's kind of an interesting thing. It's sort of a hybrid of computer code and text. And that presented some interesting licensing questions. Do you license this as a document? Do you license this thing as a computer code? In the most recent years, in addition to working on improving our course books, I created problem sets using the online open source WebWorks software to accompany all my courses. So these would be what you would be familiar with, that would be provided by, say, a publisher. But I've essentially done the work, along with some collaboration, to create that for all our courses. And you'll see why that's important in a bit. It was particularly important when the pandemic hit and we had to push everything online. I had fortunately been creating my own servers for WebWorks, which I shared with the entire math department, and a lot of people took me up on that. Other things that I've been doing in open source and open educational resources to look at other text-based OER tools. LaTeX is great, but if you want to produce different modalities like a web interface, maybe in addition to a PDF, you might have a little ebook or something like that. There are some tools that are still text-based, like pretext, that allow us to do that. So I've been looking at that with some authors. So how did I produce these course books? How did we typically go about it? Well, I decided that I was going to create these as new documents, but it wasn't from scratch, because I was working with collaborators that were providing me their material already. So I was sort of doing a lot of the conversioning and editing, and I did it in a very scaffolded approach. And what I mean by that is, from the very beginning of my teaching here at the University of Regina, I said nothing is going to be wasted. So I knew I wanted to use some slides in Math 110, our calculus course. And I said, well, I'm going to actually do the work of typing all of this stuff into a document format, and then edit that document to actually create the slides that I wanted to use also in LaTeX. So I sort of said, in the back of my mind, I knew that one day, even though I only had slides now, I would be producing a document that I would use. I also created handouts that I could use right away by taking a lot of Fatini and Iqbal's work and typesetting that, and knowing once again that one day I would merge that into a book. So finally, after a couple of years, I was able to produce our first rudimentary course book that we could use. Now, it was rudimentary in the sense it didn't have an index. It didn't have worked examples. So the examples that I was using had to be done in class. So the book just sort of said, here's an example, and then I would go and do it in class. And together, if you faithfully attended class, you could use this. But that limited its ability to be used by anybody else. So obviously the next stage was to actually create the things that were missing. And one of the things that was missing was problem sets. And so we've been using problem sets from the conventional textbook. We created problem sets that could be incorporated into our course book. But then additionally, what we did was, because not everybody could still use my course book unless they wanted to faithfully follow the same examples I was doing, what I did was use that same source material to produce lab manuals that could be used by other sections in Math 110 that stood on their own, but it was essentially just the same problems that we produced for our book. Finally, the last stage to make it a standalone document, we created worked examples for the book, so it could really be used independently by anybody else. We added an index, and some of this work has been done by students. So for instance, last summer we had an OER grant to add worked examples and an index to our second calculus book, which would essentially bring it up to the level of our first calculus book. And we were able to use that in our Math 111 courses this last winter semester. To give you an idea of the scale, we typically would have about 450 students across all the sections in Math 111 in our winter semester. And to my knowledge, everybody shared our document with the students. So that has quite a bit of impact. Even if I was the only one using my open source, open educational resources, I would be affecting, well, the 450 students that I will teach a year, but it has quite a bit broader impact than that. One of the other things, I don't like to waste anything, so I would typically answer detailed questions about problem sets in my general discussion forum on our LMS UR courses, and I would save all of my solutions. And I had a student volunteer to take all of my worked solutions that I'd saved to produce a rudimentary solutions manual, like a detailed solutions manual for my class. So I would say always think ahead and don't waste anything you're doing. Now you might say, well, why did you create something from scratch? Why didn't you use an existing book? Well, I've already mentioned why. I'm not sure existing books are necessarily exactly what you want, But one of the things at an institution is I have limited power to change the curriculum. So if the curriculum says this book is the textbook, then you can't just sort of say, well, I'm going to replace the textbook. But on the flip side, nobody can tell you that you can't develop resources for your class students to use, and nobody can stop you from sharing them. Being hired at Campion College, one of the reasons they hired me was to produce these things. And so I kind of had some people saying, please don't produce all this stuff, and other people saying, well, this is your job, go and do it. And I had to answer to the people who paid my check. So that was kind of one of the challenges. But in the end, like I said, I think the course book was a good way to go for our students anyway. One of the other pressures, and I think this might be quite common, is that there's always pressure financially, and people in charge sometimes think, well, we're not going to have money to pay markers anymore, so we're going to have to use proprietary assessment tools that are provided by the publishers, because we're going to have to get rid of our quizzes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we normally do. So in order to ameliorate that situation was precisely why I introduced WebWork to the university and why I've created problem sets. There's no longer that pressure anymore. And if we want to go that way, we always can. But we're doing it for good pedagogical reasons and not because of some financial constraint. Another thing I did was actually to get our union here to put in my contract that I had support for my large classes with marking support. So immediately now it was no longer an issue because it couldn't be cut without talking to my union. So that was kind of a useful thing. I think one of the other challenges was the fear, uncertainty, and doubt about using open educational resources. FUD, that's a term that was coined by Bill Gates because he used that kind of same critique to undermine using open source software institutionally. He told people, this is what you have to tell, instill fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that sort of happened in our case. Like I was told, oh, you can't use these resources because engineering has to be accredited and they might not give us our accreditation, whatever. Well, once again, you got to understand that my resources accompanied a large textbook that most students didn't use, but was on the books for being used. But actually, in the last round of accreditation, it was precisely all of the material that we had created, our course books, that we sent to the engineering for accreditation. And so I think it actually made us look pretty good. So quality and version control. Essentially, the way we work things, we would typically create new editions as we added our core editions, whether they would be problem sets or worked examples or index or whatever. As these things got added, then we would introduce a new edition. And within those iterations, typically it would work like this. My collaborators would often create a whole bunch of this content in handwritten form. Then it was either going to be converted by me, or occasionally when we had a grant or had some students volunteer, it was converted by some students. And then ultimately it all came down to me to do the final edit. And that included adding a lot of content. My colleagues can be kind of terse in their solutions sometimes, and I knew to make it workable for students, I had to have a little more depth. And so, and I am an instructor in my own right, and I have lots of good ideas. So, but I would typically do the final edit. At that point, because of the license we use, the GFDL, the document source has to be packaged and made available. So the license itself kind of constrained that we would put it all together in a way that other people could use. Because the documents are written in LaTeX, that's essentially a kind of a computer language for documents. We are able to use standard software versioning tools to maintain it. For instance, we can use the Git software that is typically used by software developers to actually maintain our documents. So it becomes a software problem that has been solved, essentially. In addition to LaTeX, I use other text-based tools especially for graphics. The American Math Association created something called Asymptote, which is precisely designed to create beautiful mathematical graphs that you would typically see in a textbook. I used R for things like creating box plots and some statistical things. And then Python has some very nice, that's a computer language, tools for creating excellent graphics. So the documents are typically shared with the instructors. I'm often the lead instructor for, say, Math 110 or Math 111, and I will share the slides, the documents, the handouts, all the different tiers that I produce to all the instructors, and they can use what they want. And if they only want to use the handouts or if they want to use nothing, established instructors may have their own way of doing things. A less experienced instructor will use a lot of it, and I'll talk a bit about that in a bit. I share the source online, and it's linked to as required from the documents we produce. If I wanted to be a little fancier, I could put it on GitHub. We are getting to the point where our documents are sufficiently good. They're so good that probably making them available in a repository like that would be of some value. But the main value is their use here at the university. So how do we assess quality? Obviously we get feedback from students, but I also will be teaching in parallel with other instructors. So not only do my colleagues and I look intensely at what we produce, but the other instructors who use the material will often find things, well, not often, but occasionally say this definition isn't as clear as it could be. Students will sometimes find errors. I had a Math 111 student this last semester who did every problem we created with our grant, and he found a couple of errors in our solutions, which will be fixed in the next edition. If you've got printed versions, I will typically create an errata, or sometimes I'll just fix it immediately and then share it. I do survey students about how they like it. For instance, I ask them questions about how do you want these print versions, etc., or is it good just to have it electronic? What do you like? And of course, at the end of the year, I'm in science as well, so I get the student surveys. In some ways, they'll often praise the books, but in some ways, no news is good news. Like if you were using a $300 book in your class before that was required for students, you would get incredibly negative reviews, and I avoid those. So I think that's progress. A bit about licensing. I use the license called the GFDL on my documents. It is essentially a license that's similar to the GPL, which is a software license, in that it requires you provide source material for the documents that you create. So if you think about like a Word or a LaTeX document as the source document, and then the PDF as like the compiled output program, you can kind of see there's a distinction there. So for instance, if you want somebody to edit your work or reuse or remix your work, the output PDF is not very useful, especially in mathematics, because you'd have to recode all of that math. Whereas what you really want is the source. And the CC licenses aren't big on protecting the source. They don't typically talk about source. And so you could be in an awkward situation where you shared faithfully your source and somebody else took it, remixed it, but only shared the PDF that was created and not the original source. So I kind of like the GFDL, but I like the CC licenses too because of their simplicity. Because we created everything from scratch, we have the option to license it however we wish. And so we can put it under multiple licenses. And I can, there are some reasons why you might want to do that. If you do go that route, you do have to think about if you add any material from other sources, whether that your license has to be compatible with their license. And so if you go the route of adding copyrighted material from somebody else that's under a compatible license, you're going to be restricted in that way. So you do have to think a little bit about that. So getting back to CC licenses, it does allow online sites to use the material, but it can restrict you in certain ways that are a bit awkward. So for instance, during the pandemic, I put up some videos on YouTube, and they will allow you to put it under Creative Commons license, but they won't, and they'll allow other people to remix it, but only using YouTube tools. And they explicitly say that under the EULA that you can't download the videos, even if it's your own that you create. So you can't extract it from their site. Now that's problematic when they start splashing advertising all over the place in the middle of your videos, or forcing you to have a subscription to access them. So I am wary about using online tools. If you are going to use online tools, open source software ones like Pressbooks is a good option, and it's nice that we are using that. But once again, you have to be a little careful that does it allow you to save your stuff locally? Could you get your stuff out of there if out of it if they started, say, putting up advertising in your books, or on the pages that you worked on, or started wanting to charge you too much? Okay, so you really want to think about the online tools that you use. One thing I would like to say is that our course books really saved our ability to make our introductory program work. So in the math department, we'll often have 3 graduate students teaching a section of our Math 110 course for the very first time, and it's part of their funding that they will be teaching a course like this. To be able to provide them this concise material that tracks the course allows them to have a successful course the very first time they teach us, and us as a department to have a successful teaching across the board. So we have a nice, the students get through the required material, the grad students who still have to do a lot of work in the class, creating their assessment and things like that, but they can do a respectable job teaching online and still have some time to do their research. They get to enjoy their experience. And this is why I put it under internal and external adoption, they get to see how open source and open educational resources can be used in the classroom, and they can take it with them. So they can take my book wherever they end up landing. If they teach, they could end up hacking it and turning it into something that they want to use. So a few key lessons, and I will wrap up what I have to say here and look at the questions here. I would suggest it's good to attend Open Ed conferences. The big Open Ed conference in the United States, it happens every year, and it's now online. It costs you like $70. I've gone to some great talks there, and I will refer people at the university who are working in certain fields when there's a great talk that's relevant to them. And so that's one way I try and promote OER. Applying for OER grants, I mean, most of our work was done without OER grants, but it does kind of put a gun to your head to get the work done. It makes it a priority for you. You can kind of be recognized a bit for having received the grant. And if you're having trouble with the institution backing your OER, it's not a bad thing to be able to say, well, you know, the government funded it, so are we really not going to be able to use it in our classes? Another comment I would make is that print isn't dead. So publishers would like to be able to sell you air that evaporates in 4 years. But surveys show that there's a large chunk of students that like a printed copy of the work. And we're lucky at the University of Regina, our printing services will print any OER material at cost. So a $20, you know, the students are typically paying $20 or less for my documents if they wanted a printed copy. Publishing is not easy. Creating things, there is a learning curve. You have to learn about licensing software, publishing tools, and don't take the easy way out. Do your research and think a bit about how you're going to proceed. Ask for help from our libraries, ask for help from our OER resources here on campus about your choices. And be prepared to do a lot of editing. You can't just say, I'm going to have a grad student go and do this thing, or an undergraduate student. You will end up having to work it over to if you want the quality that you expect. And finally, I would encourage you to be optimistic. So a lot of the, I would say, challenges is that people just haven't experienced using OER. And it can get you a bit down when you realize people are constantly saying, well, you stick to the textbook or this or that or the other thing. And but over time, the culture has changed. And now that we see how well it works for us to be able to use this in our math department, and how, especially for our new teachers and sessionals, I don't think we would go back. We still haven't officially abolished the proprietary textbook, but students can get through our courses quite successfully with the material that we've created. All right. So
Thank you, Robert. We're going to carry on now with Arzu and next Ting.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon. I will try to be quick. I want to leave more time to Ting. I've done, I completed one project with OER program. That was a Cree Dictionary of Mathematical Terms with visual examples that was published on Pressbook. And I'm about to finish another OER project. It's a introductory statistics textbook. And I'm working with Ting about the new version of this Cree dictionary with audio files. I think we'll talk about that in more details. I just first my motivation why I stand for the open educational resources. I work at First Nations University. I started working here in 2007, and it's not typical for Indigenous students only. It's you can see on my screen, this is the results of 2016 census, that nearly 40% of Canadian post-secondary students experience food insecurity. So you can imagine, right, if a person has a food insecurity, food problem, and how that person would afford textbooks, which get more and more expensive. So that was one of my motivations to create the resources that could be used for free. And the situation is even worse with Indigenous students. If that's the nearly 40% for all Canadian students, I can imagine it's what percentage. I don't have that specifically, but the very simple calculations can show that it's this number is much larger for Indigenous students. On the right side, you see the diagram about the poverty in Indigenous population. You see that diagram. So that was one of my motivations, and another my motivation was the accessibility of resources. I with my colleagues Ida Swan and Willie Ermine, I created the Cree Dictionary of Mathematical Terms in 2017, and we published 300 something copies, and we just donated all of them to First Nations schools across Canada. And I kept receiving many emails, and the people asked more and more copies, and our finances were limited. One of the managers of Pressbook, they told me about this resource, and then I decided to create the online version of the Cree dictionary, and we continued our work with my Cree speaker colleague Ida Swan. And we posted, and just in a few months, you can see the numbers, 8,500 downloads. That was on September 2023. So that now I suppose it's much larger number. So accessibility is just unbelievable. I mean, you compare this 320 copies and tens of thousands. It's totally different numbers. So that's why there are many other kind of benefits of these online resources. You can make the changes, you can improve, you can fix mistakes, and etc. So it's kind of I got the idea to create the textbook on this platform, and with my colleagues from University of Regina, Dr. Andrei Volodin and we started working on introductory statistics textbook. And that was, it's an original textbook. So we're writing that. Mainly, we used our own lectures, of course, that we both have been teaching these introductory statistics courses for many years, I would say decades. And but of course, we considered the new the possibilities of online version, and so we try to create something new, some new examples, and for new format. So another thing that is kind of motivation or why open resources, I cannot kind of explain that very maybe clearly. I can tell about more maybe about philosophical kind of aspects. When you teach, you kind of deliver some materials and you make them open, right? It's already open resource. You tell that to the audience, share that with your students. Yes, you are paid and for your work. And that's why I think it's kind of to make the textbook, to create the textbook based on your lectures, which were paid already, and then make money on that resource. I kind of morally, it sounds a little bit strange for me. Maybe that's just my personal opinion. I don't want to say that it's the exactly right thing, but that was another motivation why I decided to work on the open resources. I want to kind of maybe talk more about the few more things. First of all, maybe answering those questions, challenging moments. This textbook, statistics textbook, it's an original textbook. And Andre and I, none of us were born in Canada, in Saskatchewan, but I feel myself as a Saskatchewan patriot. And statistics as a subject, historically it was even the word statistics, it came in Germany. It was a German mathematician. He kind of created that term statistics. It was initially like government and state studies or government studies. It's something, it's not very abstract like mathematics. In mathematics, you can teach mathematics and you would never realize who is a teacher from which country and whatever. But statistics is a little bit, it has some footprint of country, of the government, of the society. There are many perfect textbooks on statistics, but most of them are, the others are from United States. Some textbooks were adopted for Canadian edition. But we decided to make this book specifically Canadian and even more specifically Saskatchewan-based. And also we tried to use indigenous elements for this textbook. So I believe we did something good, but that's just my opinion. The challenges, I would like to talk now about the challenges. First of all, it's kind of little stereotype. Many people and even the editors, publishers, they think that the online resource is just compiling something from the internet. Very often that's right, but not always. And in our case, we developed the original product. We didn't use any kind of open resources or whatever. Yes, we use some examples, but and we give the reference. So that's and in the I would be happy if editors or reviewers they would consider that. It's not something just compiling different materials from the internet. And also, those reviewers, mostly instructional designers, yes, they have very good kind of intention, and they want to make it, the materials, maybe they think they want to make it better, but sometimes they forget about kind of freedom as authors. Even if you are a perfect instructional designer, you may have one view. I may have another one. I write my book. I want to write it this way. If I make, let's say, create lecture notes or something like that, yeah, that's of course you can say that, you know, that you have to give this shape. Square is not good. You have to give the circle, or you have to use a red color, not blue. But I would like to keep my freedom as an author. Another problem was kind of like I faced that was maybe my own problem. I'm not too much technical person. When we I started creating the online version of dictionary, I was thinking that I would just migrate the Word document to the Pressbook and that's it. Apparently it didn't work, and I had to do that everything by hand, and for each word I had to create. That's again, it wasn't just a copy and paste. You had to do that everything again. So that was another my kind of difficulties. And finally, the one difficulty is that for all those materials, we worked with elders, and we asked elders to review them. We had to hire indigenous students for working on this project, and sometimes it's difficult to explain to non-indigenous people that how we work. I really appreciate University of Regina supported all those projects, but sometimes I had difficulties to explain to people from finance department or HR department how to proceed the payment for elders or indigenous students. My kind of, some people think that the elders is someone, you know, freelancer, that they give the interview, and then they will invoice us, and we have to pay them $300. So it doesn't work that way. And also we have to consider the timing problems, because the elders mostly are aged people. Just that Ting had scheduled to record the interview with one elder, and he got sick. He's in the hospital now. So you cannot keep that timing, and we have to consider that they are mostly aged people. But overall, as I'm optimistic. I think this open resources is a future. That's why, and most of the challenges that I face, it's because we are kind of at the beginning of this process, and maybe in 10 years or 5 years, and now time goes fast. So maybe most of those problems will just disappear, because we will learn how to solve them. So that's basically it. And again, I want to appreciate the help of OER program of University of Regina and Shuana in person. That's for ongoing support. Without their help, I wouldn't be able to create any of those resources. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Arzu. Ting.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Arzu. I'll keep it brief. I know we're out of time. So Arzu already shared the first version of the Create Dictionary book. I'm just going to share my screen and show you the new version we created. Let me just go. So originally, Arzu and Ida designed the Create Dictionary for the Create speaking students. So a lot of our students from Northern Campus, they're indigenous student, and English is not their first language. They speak Create, so they created this dictionary for them. And I attended one of Arzu's talk last year and asked him, "Oh, have you thought of incorporating audio in it?" That kind of like sparked our idea of applying this small grant to expand on the existing version of the book. So now on my screen, you can see the second version of the book. So what we did is we rearranged the layout of the book. Right now, right on the top, this is the audio clip for the entire page. And for this letter A, it's roughly 8 minutes. And as you scroll, you'll see the English term, the Create translation, and beside the Create translation, you'll see the audio. And underneath, it's the definition. And we also have beautiful illustration created by indigenous artists. So to create this entire book, at the beginning, we thought it's fairly easy. We just have some Create speaker record, then I do the editing and put it in the book. And in reality, it's not that easy. If you read the stats from Stat Canada, they reported there are roughly 80,000 Create speakers in Canada. And to find someone we know of, and they're able to speak the different dialects of Create in this dictionary, it's quite challenging. So it took us a little bit time to find the speakers to participate in the project. So the software we've used for creating the audio, the illustration, and our audiobook are, the primary one is Adobe Illustrator to create all the graphics. The second one I use to edit all the audio and videos are Camtasia from TechSmith. And the third audio editing software I use is called Audiate. So Audiate wasn't on my list when we originally proposed the project, because I thought I could just chip out all those Create words out of the entire recording, then it could be embedded here. But it turned out it's a lot harder to take it out from Camtasia. So I selected Audiate, which generate the scripts automatically on the screen for me. And I can select the Create words, the recording of the Create words. Then with a right click, I can save that tiny file as a separate audio file, then embed it here. So thanks, Shauna, for the idea of embedding our audio as H5P files. You can see it has a white background on this icon. It's because it's a H5P file. This is so far the best option we have to embed audios with a nice icon on Pressbook. So we stick with that. And so eventually we want to publish this book in this format. It's still a work in progress. And the audiobook is going to be embedded on each page. And also we're going to publish it on YouTube as well. So this is the prototype I created for the audiobook. It has a little bit visual on it for people like Stu saying the words and pictures. And the future direction for this project, we're hoping to publish the audiobook, just the audio itself, on Spotify and Audible on the Apple products. So hopefully with all those, we can attract more people's attention and help our students to learn math and learn Korean. Okay, I'm just going to stop here. Shauna, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ting. What did you decide on with in terms of a dialect of Cree? How did you come to that decision?
So the different dialects of Korean it's already there. And when Arzu was working with our indigenous speakers, they composed those Korean words to reflect the math meaning, because in Korean, you wouldn't find direct words representing absolute value. So it's a composed of words. And they kind of take into the consideration of different dialects and select the neutral ground. For some of the words, if you scroll on the book, you'll notice like different dialects are provided there because they can't really find essential words to represent.
Very interesting. Thank you, Ting. Thank you, everyone, for your patience as we got to hear from quite a number of people this morning. Really interesting projects. And if you have more questions, just contact them directly.